The wind had carried the smell of smoke long before the riders appeared. Clara Whitfield stood on the porch of her father's ranch, her pale hands gripping the rail, watching the horizon shiver with heat and dust. The sun had nearly sunk behind the buttes, turning the sky into a bruised streak of gold and red. Somewhere in the distance, cattle bawled, horses screamed, and a single gunshot cracked through the stillness. Her father's voice thundered from the barn. "Clara, inside now!" But she didn't move fast enough. By the time she turned, they were already there. Dark figures on painted ponies, feathers catching the dying light. The Apache warriors moved like shadows come to life, their faces streaked with war paint, their movements swift and sure. A moment later, chaos broke loose. The corral splintered, men shouted, and flames leapt up from the hayloft. Clara froze on the porch steps, unable to comprehend the fire, the screaming, the pounding hooves. Then a hand seized her arm. She cried out, kicking, clawing, but her attacker didn't strike. Instead, he lifted her effortlessly and threw her over a horse's back. The world spun, and the last thing she saw of her home was her father running toward her through the fire, his voice hoarse with her name. Then everything vanished into the thunder of hooves. When Clara awoke, the night was vast and cold. She was lying on the hard ground, her wrists bound with rawhide, a blanket thrown roughly over her shoulders. The moonlight revealed shapes moving around a fire, men with long braids, their faces painted, their weapons resting at their sides. The smell of smoke and sage filled the air. Her throat tightened. She tried to sit up, but the bonds bit into her skin. "Please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Please let me go." No one answered. Then one man stepped forward, the one who had taken her. He was taller than the rest, his expression unreadable. In the firelight, his features were sharp and proud, and though his face was streaked with black paint, his eyes were startlingly human. He crouched before her and spoke in a language she didn't understand. His voice was low, steady, like the riverbed in spring flood, strong, unyielding. When she flinched, he sighed and switched to broken English. "No hurt you?" he said simply. Clara's lips parted in disbelief. "No, hurt me?" she echoed. He shook his head once. Then, reaching behind him, he pulled a canteen from his belt and held it out. She hesitated, expecting a trick, but her thirst overpowered her pride. The water was warm and tasted of leather, but it slid down her dry throat like salvation. He watched her the whole time, neither smiling nor threatening, only studying her as if trying to decide what she was made of. When she handed the canteen back, she found the courage to ask, "Why? Why did you take me?" He looked toward the fire where the other warriors murmured softly. "War," he said. "Your people take from us. We take back." Her chest tightened with fear and anger. "Then kill me," she spat. "Don't pretend to be kind." His eyes flicked to hers, dark and wounded, not with guilt but with something deeper. "Not kill, woman," he said quietly. "Not my way." And then he stood, turned, and walked back to the fire, leaving her trembling in the shadows. That night, as the fire crackled and the warriors sang low around it, Clara lay awake, her heart pounding against the earth. She could hear the soft rustle of the wind through the pines, the distant cry of a coyote, and closer, the steady breathing of her captor as he kept watch nearby. She didn't know his name, or why he'd looked at her the way he had, as if she were more than just a prisoner. But one thought burned through her fear as fiercely as the fire that had destroyed her home. This man could destroy her life, or change it forever, and somewhere deep inside she was terrified to learn which it would be. When dawn finally broke, it came in streaks of pale rose over the jagged ridges. Clara hadn't slept at all. Every sound, the creak of saddle leather, the hiss of embers, the shift of a horse's hoof, kept her nerves raw and alert. When the Apache camp began to stir, she forced herself to sit up, her wrists still tied. Her captor, the tall warrior with the storm-gray eyes, approached her quietly. His name, she learned from the others' voices, was Taza. The name sounded like wind over stone, hard, enduring. He crouched beside her, cut the bindings from her wrists with a sharp flint knife, and handed her a piece of flatbread wrapped in leaves. "Eat," he said simply. She stared at it, her throat tightening. "Why?" she whispered, still defiant. "So I'll be strong enough to be traded?" His jaw flexed, a flicker of something, pain, annoyance, crossing his features. "Eat," he repeated and turned away. Clara's stomach ached with hunger. Pride and fear battled inside her, but hunger won. She ate slowly, glancing around the camp. There were women and children among the warriors, something she hadn't expected. A small boy, barefoot and curious, crept closer, staring at her bright hair as if it were spun gold. When she smiled faintly, he darted away behind a woman who looked like his mother. The woman's gaze was sharp but not cruel. She murmured something in Apache that made the boy giggle. It was the first time Clara realized she wasn't surrounded by monsters. These people laughed, worked, and sang softly while tending their fires. They were human. As the sun rose higher, the camp began to move. Taza motioned for her to follow as they packed the hides and loaded the ponies. When she stumbled, he caught her arm before she fell. His grip was firm but gentle, his touch startlingly warm. "You walk," he said. "Not prisoner. Not free." She blinked up at him. "What does that mean?" He hesitated, then said in halting English, "You stay until my chief decides. Maybe you go home, maybe not." Her heart sank. "So I'm a bargaining piece," she muttered. He didn't answer. But later, when the group paused to drink from a stream, he offered her the canteen first before drinking himself. The gesture confused her more than comforted her. By dusk, they reached a hidden valley surrounded by red cliffs. Smoke curled lazily from fires, and children ran barefoot between the lodges. The air was thick with the scent of wood smoke and roasted corn. It was a world apart, wild, enclosed, and strangely alive. Taza led her to a small shelter near the edge of the camp. Inside was a blanket of woven fiber, a clay bowl, and a small water jug. "You stay here," he said. "No one harm you," she crossed her arms. "And if I try to leave?" He met her eyes steadily. "Desert will kill you before I do." She shivered at his calm certainty. Yet there was no cruelty in his voice, only truth. He turned to go, but she stopped him. "Why are you different?" she asked. "You could have let them hurt me." He paused at the doorway, the firelight catching the outline of his profile. "My mother was taken once," he said quietly. "White men did not show her mercy. I do not forget." Before she could speak, he was gone. That night, Clara sat alone, listening to the sounds of the Apache village, drums, laughter, and the low murmur of women's voices. Somewhere outside, she knew Taza kept watch. The fire cast long shadows against the lodge walls, painting her face with gold and orange. For the first time since her capture, she didn't cry. She simply stared into the flames, thinking about the man who had spared her, the people who lived so fiercely, and the strange, unspoken current that seemed to pull her toward the very life she feared. Out here, in this hidden valley of strangers and smoke, Clara felt something shifting, something dangerous and tender blooming inside her heart. She didn't yet have a name for it, but she knew that the line between captor and protector was already starting to blur. Days passed in a blur of sun and dust, each one carving deeper confusion into Clara's heart. She woke with the women at dawn, helped grind corn, fetched water from the stream, and learned to braid reeds into mats. No one mistreated her. If anything, they treated her like a curiosity, the pale-haired woman who didn't belong. But every evening, when the sky turned red and the men returned from hunting, her gaze sought one man alone, Taza. He rarely spoke. Sometimes she caught him watching her across the fire, his face unreadable, his eyes reflecting the flames. When he did speak, it was only to offer food or to make sure she had water, or to ask quietly if anyone had troubled her. There was something in his stillness that unsettled her. It wasn't coldness. It was restraint, and restraint, she realized, could be more dangerous than anger. One night, Clara overheard the conversation that shattered her fragile calm. She had been carrying water from the stream when two warriors passed by, their voices low but urgent. They spoke mostly in Apache, but a few English words slipped through: trade, woman, northern band. Her stomach turned to ice. That night she sat near the fire pretending not to listen as Taza spoke with an older warrior. His tone was respectful but sharp. The older man's response was final, his hand striking the air in dismissal. When Taza walked away, his jaw was tight, his fists clenched. Clara didn't need to understand their language to know what had been said. She was to be traded, bartered away like livestock to another tribe, one that might not see her as anything more than a spoil of war. That night, she made her decision. When the camp fell quiet, she waited until the fire sank low, The moon was high, silvering the valley floor. Taza was asleep, or so she thought, on the far side of the clearing. Clara's heart thundered as she wrapped a small bundle of food in her shawl and crept toward the shadows beyond the camp. Her bare feet made no sound on the sand. She moved past sleeping warriors, past the tethered horses, until the wilderness lay before her, open and terrifying. Freedom was only a few steps away. But before she could take those steps, a voice spoke behind her. "Where will you go, Ishke?" She froze. Slowly she turned. Taza stood a few paces away, his face half in shadow, his eyes glinting with sorrow more than anger. "The desert waits," he said quietly. "No water, no trail. If you run, you die before sunrise." She lifted her chin. "I'd rather die free than be traded like an animal." For a long moment neither spoke. The night wind stirred the ends of her hair, and in the distance a coyote howled. Then Taza took a single step closer. "I will not trade you," he said finally. His voice was low, strained, as though the words cost him. "But the chief decides, not me." "Then I have no choice," she whispered. Something flickered in his eyes, pain maybe, or fear she couldn't name. "You have choice," he said. "You stay, or you run." He hesitated, then turned away, disappearing into the darkness. That was all the permission she needed. Clara ran. She didn't look back. Not at the campfires fading behind her. Not at the silent valley, not even at the sky. She ran until her lungs burned and her feet bled. The desert spread before her like an endless sea of ash and starlight. When the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, she stumbled and fell, gasping, trembling, free. Or so she thought. Because as she lay there, shivering under the open sky, one thought rose up from her heart, terrifying and undeniable. She had left Taza behind, and for reasons she couldn't understand. The freedom she'd longed for suddenly felt like loss. The desert stretched before Clara like a vast, merciless ocean, pale and unending under the relentless sun. Her feet were blistered, her lips cracked and bleeding, and the small bundle of food she had brought was already gone. Dust clung to her hair, her clothes, her skin, and every step felt heavier than the last. By mid-morning she realized she had no idea which way to go. The mountains she had glimpsed at the edge of the horizon seemed impossibly far. Every hill and ravine looked the same. Every shadow offered no shelter, only the illusion of hope. She sank to the sand, panting, exhausted. Her arms and legs trembled from dehydration, and the fear she had tried to bury in her stubborn pride began to rise like smoke in her chest. The desert was silent except for the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead, the rustle of dry sage in the wind, and the echo of her own ragged breaths. Clara cursed herself for fleeing. She had imagined freedom as a promise, but now it felt like punishment. She had expected danger, yes, but not this. Not the merciless sun, not the empty horizon, not the taste of salt on her lips as sweat dried into crust. By nightfall, she was close to collapse. Her throat was raw, her vision blurred, and the sand beneath her felt like coals burning through her skin. She sank beside a dried-up riverbed, curling into herself for warmth against the sudden chill of desert night. The stars stretched endlessly above, indifferent to her suffering. Her thoughts drifted back to the camp, to Taza, to the strange, quiet strength he had shown while keeping her alive. She remembered the warmth of his hand when he caught her stumbling, the steady look in his storm-gray eyes when he told her, "Not my way to hurt you." For the first time, she recognized a dangerous truth. She hadn't escaped because she hated him, as she had told herself, but because fear and pride had blinded her to what was growing inside her. A low cry echoed across the sand, and Clara's heart leapt. Coyotes, she thought, or jackals, but the sound came closer, deliberate, measured. She squinted into the darkness, too weak to rise, too frightened to flee. Then she saw him. Taza appeared on the ridge above, riding a dark horse. His silhouette was steady, commanding, familiar in a way that made her chest ache. He rode to the riverbed, dismounted, and before she could speak, he knelt beside her. "You cannot survive alone," he said quietly, his voice carrying both anger and concern. "The desert will kill you before the sun rises again." Clara's pride faltered, replaced by the helplessness she had fought so hard to deny. I didn't want to be." "A prisoner," she whispered. "You were never a prisoner to me," he said softly. "Only to fear." He lifted her carefully into his arms, strong and sure, and carried her to the horse. The ground burned beneath him, but his grip never faltered. He offered her water, then wrapped her in a blanket. And finally she felt the warmth of protection, not just from his body, but from the unwavering presence of someone who refused to let her die. That night, as the wind whispered across the desert sands, Clara lay beside the fire Taza built. She traced the lines of his face in the flickering light, remembering every small kindness he had shown, the water, the bread, the careful watch over her in the camp. She realized with sudden clarity that she wasn't running from him anymore. She was running from herself, the truth of what her heart had begun to crave, what she had been too proud to admit. And as she drifted into a fitful sleep, the first stars of dawn breaking across the horizon, she knew one thing with terrifying certainty: she would never survive this desert without him. And she could not bear to imagine a life in which she didn't have him by her side. Clara awoke to the soft crackle of embers and the smell of wood smoke curling through the cold morning air. Her body ached from the harsh desert night, her muscles stiff from hours of being carried. She opened her eyes to find herself wrapped in a blanket, leaning against a rock with Taza seated quietly nearby, sharpening a knife. For a moment she couldn't speak, her throat raw from days without water. Her chest heaved not from exertion, but from the relief that she was still alive. The desert had almost claimed her, but he hadn't let it. He hadn't let her. "You are alive," he said softly, not looking up from his work. His voice was calm, steady, but there was a tension beneath it, as if he had carried her not just through the night, but through some invisible burden. Clara tried to rise, but her legs betrayed her. He was instantly at her side, catching her before she could collapse. "No," he said firmly. "Not yet." She closed her eyes, leaning against him, and for the first time allowed herself to feel the fear, the relief, the gratitude that had been coiled tight inside her since her escape. I thought I'd die," she whispered. "You almost did," he admitted. "But you did not. You are strong, but not enough for the desert alone." Her heart pounded. She wanted to protest, to assert her independence, but the weight of exhaustion and her growing feelings made her silent. Taza carried her to the horse, his hands gentle yet unyielding. She clung to him, every heartbeat hammering with a mixture of terror and something she dared not name. As they rode through the desert, the world seemed impossibly large and empty, but for the first time she didn't feel alone. His presence beside her, the steady rhythm of his horse, the way he kept his gaze on the horizon, everything about him was a lifeline. Hours later, when they stopped by a stream hidden between jagged cliffs, Taza dismounted and held the horse while Clara knelt to drink. She cupped her hands in the water, the cold liquid soothing her parched throat. When she looked up, he was watching her, storm-gray eyes unreadable. "You are alive," he said again, "and I will not let anyone take you from me." Clara's chest tightened. The words were not a threat, yet they held a promise more binding than any chain. For the first time she understood that her fear of captivity had been tangled with her growing affection for him. She had run from danger, but the danger had not been Taza. It had been the feeling she couldn't yet name. Later, as they made camp for the night, Taza built a fire and offered her water and flatbread. The silence stretched comfortably between them, filled only by the crackling flames. Clara sat close enough to feel the warmth radiating from him, hesitant, heart pounding with a dangerous mix of desire and gratitude. "I should not feel this way," she murmured almost to herself. "What way?" he asked softly, his eyes never leaving hers. "This feeling," she said, her voice shaking. I should hate you. I should." He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You do not hate," he said simply. "You only do not yet understand." For a long moment she simply stared at him, realizing with growing clarity that what she felt went beyond gratitude or relief. Her chest tightened with the truth she had tried to deny. She was falling for him, and nothing in her life, no fear, no pride, no escape could change it. That night, wrapped in a blanket beside the fire, she watched Taza's face in the flickering light. Every detail, the curve of his jaw, the storm in his eyes, the gentleness in his movements, etched itself into her memory. She had been captured and she had fled, but now she knew one thing with certainty: she would not survive the desert without him, and she could not imagine a life in which he was not by her side. The fire crackled, the wind whispered across the cliffs, and Clara allowed herself to rest, knowing that her rescue had not only saved her life, it had begun to claim her heart. The days that followed were a delicate rhythm of survival and discovery. Clara no longer thought of herself as a prisoner, though she remained among the Apache. Each sunrise brought the murmur of the camp, the children laughing barefoot, women pounding corn, the occasional song carried across the valley. Life moved around her in a way she had never experienced in her sheltered ranch home, raw, honest, and alive. Taza stayed near her, not as a captor, but as a constant, quiet presence. He never demanded her attention, never forced conversation, but his actions spoke louder than words. When she stumbled over roots while carrying water, he caught her. When she shivered beside the stream at dawn, he draped a blanket over her shoulders. The smallest gestures, the offering of food first, the careful watch while she slept, the gentle guidance when she rode a horse began to chip away at the fear that had gripped her heart since her capture. One morning, Clara ventured further into the camp, helping an older woman grind corn. She watched as Taza returned from hunting, carrying a small deer over his shoulder. His movements were fluid and precise, the work of a lifetime honed by necessity. But what struck Clara most was the care with which he tended to the meat, the attention he paid to every detail. He was not just a warrior. He was a man who respected life, both human and animal. When he noticed her watching, he approached. "Do not stare," he said, though his tone lacked accusation. "You will learn. Soon you understand." "I don't understand anything here," Clara admitted, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Everything is different. Strange. Beautiful. Terrifying." Taza regarded her in silence for a long moment, then said softly, almost to himself, "Understanding comes from patience, not fear." She frowned. "Patience?" "Yes, watch, learn, listen, only then do you know." Over the next week, Clara began to see the camp through new eyes. She learned the ways of the land, the hidden springs, the paths through the cliffs, the way the wind carried sound across the valley. She observed the interactions between the warriors and their families, saw the respect and laughter that threaded through their daily lives. Slowly, the harsh lines of captivity blurred. This was no prison. This was a community. And through it all, Taza remained a steady presence. He taught her simple words in his language. Nade for thank you, Shiyaji for my little one. Each word carried weight, a bridge between worlds. He corrected her pronunciation with gentle patience, never mockery, and each time he smiled at her small success, Clara felt a warmth spreading through her chest that she could no longer deny. One evening, they sat by the fire together after a long day. Taza roasted a small rabbit while Clara cleaned the knives and prepared the herbs. The silence was comfortable, not oppressive, and for the first time since her capture, Clara felt truly safe. "You are learning quickly," he observed. I want to survive," she replied softly. "And I want to understand this life. I don't want to be afraid anymore." Taza's eyes softened. "Fear is natural, but fear must not control you." Her heart thumped against her ribs, a rhythm she could no longer ignore. Every glance, every gesture from him, carried a quiet intensity that both terrified and thrilled her. She realized with a jolt, she was no longer simply grateful for his protection. She was drawn to him, and that truth frightened her far more than the desert ever could. That night, Clara lay awake, listening to the wind rustle through the trees and the faint sound of Taza moving outside. The stars stretched endlessly above, indifferent to human concerns, yet she felt a fragile thread connecting them. Hers to his, the human to the human, heart to heart. She had come here as a captive. She had fled thinking freedom lay elsewhere, and yet in the quiet rhythm of the Apache camp, among people who had shown her kindness and resilience, and with Taza's quiet guidance, she had begun to understand something terrifying and exhilarating. The life she had thought impossible, freedom paired with love, might be possible after all. Her heart ached with the realization that fear was no longer her master. Something far stronger had taken its place. The wind shifted that morning, carrying a faint smell of smoke and the distant clatter of hooves. Clara's pulse quickened as she looked toward the horizon. A white militia, armed and organized, had entered the Apache territory. The elders murmured among themselves, casting anxious glances at the valley's entrances. Clara knew immediately what this meant. her chance to return to her own people. When Taza approached her, his expression was guarded, the storm-gray eyes unreadable as ever. He stopped a few feet away, studying her as though trying to weigh the right words. "They come," he said quietly. "You can go now." Clara's heart lurched. She had dreamed of this moment for days, weeks. But now that it had arrived, she found herself hesitating. "Go alone?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You have a choice," he said. "You may return to your people. You will be safe there. Or you may stay. But if you leave, I cannot follow." Her stomach twisted. Safe, free, that's what she had wanted. Yet the thought of leaving him, the man who had saved her, taught her and shown her a new world, made her chest ache with an unfamiliar pain. She realized in that instant that her heart no longer belonged to the world she had fled. She began, then stopped. Words failed her. Taza studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Do not speak yet. Think. Desert teaches nothing. Heart teaches everything." Clara's eyes filled with tears she refused to shed. She looked around the camp at the children playing, the women working, the warriors who had once terrified her, and then she looked at Taza. He had been her captor, her protector, her guide, and now, unknowingly, the keeper of her heart. "Go," she whispered finally, almost to herself. "Go find your militia. Save yourself. I'll stay." Taza's hand twitched as though reaching to hold her, but he did not move. Instead, he gave her a long, piercing look, one that seemed to burn away her doubts and fears. "You do not understand what you feel," he said quietly. "But soon you will. Soon you know your heart. If you stay, your people may call you safe, but your heart will call you elsewhere." Clara's pulse raced. She felt a strange terror knowing he spoke the truth. She had fled once thinking she could outrun her feelings, but now she realized the desert had not merely been a physical challenge. It had been a mirror, reflecting the truth she could no longer deny. She loved him. The camp stirred as the militia drew nearer, their shouts and the rhythm of horses growing louder. Clara's chest tightened with panic. To remain was to defy her family, her past, and her world. To leave was to betray the man who had saved her life and, unknowingly, claimed her heart. Taza stepped closer, his presence magnetic, grounding her trembling body. He didn't touch her, not yet, but the mere nearness of him was enough to steady her racing thoughts. "You have a choice," he repeated, softer this time, almost a whisper. "Follow your fear, or follow your heart." Her mind screamed to obey reason, to ride back to the world she knew. But her heart, the same heart that had trembled when he had carried her through the desert and watched over her like a shadow, cried out for him. Without another thought, she turned, running past the campfires, past the sleeping warriors, toward the ridge where Taza stood. She called his name, her voice raw with urgency, terror, and longing. Taza's eyes widened the slightest fraction, and a faint smile brushed his lips. Without hesitation, he dropped the rifle in his hand, stepped forward, and caught her in his arms. "You ran," he said quietly, though his voice carried both relief and quiet reproach. "I ran," she admitted, "but I was running from myself. From what I feel for you." His hands framed her face, and for the first time Clara felt entirely seen, entirely known. "Then you know now," he said softly. "You stay." And as the militia's shouts faded in the distance, swallowed by the valley and the cliffs, Clara realized the truth she had been running from. The heart cannot be commanded by reason alone. It belongs only to the one who dares to claim it, and she had finally come home. Clara's return to her family's ranch was nothing like she had imagined. The landscape, once familiar, now seemed smaller, muted, and hollow. Smoke still clung faintly to the scorched timbers of the barn, a silent reminder of the raid that had changed everything. Her father, his face lined with grief and age, rushed to meet her, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Clara, you're alive!" he cried, lifting her into a trembling embrace. She clung to him for a moment, the familiar scent of leather and hay a brief comfort. But beneath it all, a strange emptiness settled in her chest. The reunion felt forced, as though the world she had fled to survive had become foreign to her, and the one she had longed for most, the one who had seen her completely, was nowhere in sight. Her mother wept silently, brushing Clara's hair back from her face, whispering prayers of thanks. Neighbors came and went, offering food and condolences, marveling at her survival. The ranch, which had once been her sanctuary, now felt like a cage of expectations, whispers, and questions. Clara tried to eat, but the food tasted bland, the meat dry and unseasoned. The laughter of her siblings grated on her nerves, their voices reminding her of a life she no longer fit into. At night she lay awake in her old room, the walls unchanged but the world beyond them unrecognizable. Dreams of Taza haunted her sleep, the storm-gray eyes, the gentle strength in his hands, the way he had carried her across the desert, protecting her when even the sun and sand had conspired against her. She had fled from captivity thinking freedom lay in returning home. Now she realized her captivity had been a mirror, revealing the heart she had denied. And the truth was undeniable. Her heart had stayed in the mountains with Taza. Her family noticed her restlessness, her distracted gaze, but attributed it to trauma. Only Clara knew the truth. She was living among people she loved, yet her soul ached for someone she could not have. One afternoon, she wandered to the edge of the burned corral, staring at the distant horizon. The mountains loomed in the distance, jagged and inviting, as if calling her back. Her hands trembled and tears prickled her eyes. She whispered Taza's name into the wind, unsure if he could hear her, unsure if it mattered. Her father appeared behind her, concern etched in every line of his face. "Clara, what troubles you?" I can't stay," she admitted, her voice trembling. "Everything here. It's not my world anymore. I belong somewhere else," he frowned, worry mingling with confusion. "Somewhere else? Where would that be, child?" She swallowed hard. "With him," she said simply, the words burning through her chest. "The Apache who saved me, who showed me what it means to live and to care. I have to find him." Her father's eyes widened and anger flickered briefly before concern took over. "Clara, you cannot go alone." "I have no choice," she interrupted softly but firmly. "My heart is there. My life is there. I have to go." That night Clara packed lightly, taking only what she could carry. She left a note for her parents, a brief explanation and a promise to return if she could. Her heart hammered with anticipation, fear, and longing. Every sound, every movement felt heightened. The creak of the door, the whisper of the wind, the memory of Taza's quiet strength. Mounting a horse borrowed from the neighbors, she set off toward the mountains, her eyes fixed on the horizon where the valley began to rise into jagged cliffs. Each mile carried her closer to him, each hour heavier with the promise of reunion and the hope that he would still be there, waiting. As the wind whipped her hair, she whispered a vow to herself she would never run from what she felt again. She had escaped, she had survived, and now she was returning, not to the world she had left, but to the one that held her heart. And in that vast expanse of desert and sky, Clara Whitfield finally understood the cost of true freedom and the depth of love that could never be contained. The news reached Clara before she even approached the edge of the valley. An Apache warrior had been captured near town. Rumors traveled faster than the wind, whispers carried from the neighboring ranches and the militia posts. He was accused of theft, of taking cattle, and some even called for execution. Clara's chest tightened. She knew instantly. This had to be Taza. The realization hit her like a whip. He had been captured, beaten, perhaps even hanging on by sheer force of will. Her stomach churned, and without a second thought she urged her horse faster. Every mile was a torment of hope and fear, the landscape blurring beneath her. When she reached the makeshift jail on the outskirts of the settlement, the scene was worse than she had imagined. Taza was chained, bruised, and slumped against the wooden bars of the corral. The militia's men stood around him, rifles leaning carelessly against the fence posts. His storm-gray eyes lifted as she approached, and in that glance Clara saw a mix of pain, surprise, and a faint flicker of something tender. Recognition. Her voice broke as she shouted his name. "Taza," heads turned. The men looked at her with suspicion and curiosity. "What is this?" one demanded. "He is innocent," Clara cried, stepping forward. Her hands shook, but her gaze was steady. "He saved me. He protected me. He is not a criminal. If you hang him, you will kill the only man who ever showed me mercy." The men hesitated, murmuring among themselves. Some looked unconvinced, some unconcerned, but the urgency in her voice, the raw truth, made even the hardest eyes soften for a moment. Taza struggled to rise as she approached. "You came," he said hoarsely, his voice raw but steady. "You did not run from danger." "I never could," she replied. Not when it comes to you. The guards grumbled, shifting uneasily. Clara, sensing the tension, pressed her advantage. Listen to me, she demanded. He is more than a warrior. He is my protector, my teacher, my heart. Do you not see that you would be taking a life that has saved another? Her words, spoken with conviction, carried the weight of truth. The commander of the militia studied her, then glanced at the other men. Release him, he said reluctantly. But keep your eyes on him. No tricks. The chains were removed and Taza stretched his bruised arms. He didn't speak immediately, only watched Clara as if weighing the depth of her resolve. When she stepped closer, the tension between them eased slightly, replaced with a quiet acknowledgement that had been building since the day she first realized she couldn't survive without him. You could have stayed safe, Taza murmured, his fingers brushing the faint scars on his knuckles. You chose me over the world you knew. I had no choice, Clara whispered, placing a hand over his chest where her heart pounded as fiercely as his. I could not live in a world without you. I would rather face anything than lose you. A faint smile, almost imperceptible, softened Taza's stern features. Then you stay? He asked quietly. Yes, she said without hesitation. I am not running from my heart. Not now, not ever. The sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows over the dusty corral. For the first time in weeks, Clara felt the weight of fear lift. The militia faded into the distance, their horses kicking up dust behind them, leaving Clara and Taza alone once more in the quiet, sunlit valley. And in that silence, she knew the truth. The decision had been made not by force, not by fear, but by love. The one thing stronger than any desert, any captivity, or any world that had once tried to claim her. The desert wind carried the scent of sage and earth as Clara and Taza rode together toward the mountains, leaving the settlement and its judgments behind. The sun hung low on the horizon, casting the cliffs in shades of amber and crimson, painting the world in the colors of fire and longing. Clara's chest was tight with anticipation, her fingers brushing against Taza's as he held the reins. She no longer feared the vast wilderness. It had become a place of freedom, a witness to the truth of her heart. For the first time in her life, she felt entirely seen. Every hardship she had endured, the fire that had destroyed her home, the initial fear of captivity, the desperate flight across the desert, had led her to this moment. Her heart, once caged by fear and pride, now beat in quiet harmony with his. Taza rode beside her, his posture relaxed yet commanding, storm-gray eyes scanning the horizon with the careful vigilance of a protector. But when he glanced at her, his expression softened, and a faint, almost imperceptible smile tugged at his lips. You came back, he said, his voice low but steady, carrying the weight of relief and unspoken emotion. I had to, she admitted, her voice trembling. I ran from fear, Taza, but I could never run from this. She gestured to the mountains rising in the distance, the land that had shaped them both. From you. His horse slowed, matching her pace. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and Clara leaned into the touch. You have no idea what you mean to me, he said quietly. Not just for saving you, but for trusting me with your heart. Clara's eyes filled with tears she refused to hide. I was afraid, she whispered. Afraid of what I might feel. But now I know. I belong here, with you. No one else matters. The mountains grew nearer, their jagged peaks framed by the setting sun. Taza guided them to a hidden valley, the same one where she had first come to understand the strength and kindness of his people. The campfires from before were gone, but the air still carried a memory of warmth and laughter. Clara dismounted, her legs shaky but steady, and Taza helped her to the ground. For a long moment, they simply stood facing each other, the wind whispering around them, the desert stretching endlessly beyond the cliffs. Then, without a word, he took her hands in his, pressing them to his chest. The beating of his heart beneath her fingers matched her own, steady and sure. I ran once, she said softly, her forehead resting against his, but I will never run from you again. He held her close, the strength in his arms both protective and tender. Then you are home, he murmured. With me always. Clara closed her eyes, letting herself be enveloped in the safety and warmth of his presence. The sun dipped behind the mountains, casting a golden glow over the valley, and in that light every shadow of fear, every scar of the past, seemed to dissolve. She had fled, she had survived, and she had returned, not just to him, but to a life she had never imagined possible. Their lips met in a gentle, tentative kiss, a promise of trust and love, of hearts joined not by circumstance but by choice. The world beyond the cliffs and the desert could wait. Here, in this hidden valley, time seemed to hold its breath for them. They walked together through the brush, hands intertwined, their steps echoing a rhythm older than fear or loss, a rhythm of belonging, of hearts finally aligned. Clara realized that love had not come to her in safety, nor had it been offered freely. It had been forged in fire, in fear, in survival, and now, having faced everything, she understood its power. The stars began to peek through the velvet sky as night fell, and Taza draped a blanket over her shoulders. "We will face the world together," he said quietly. "Yes," she whispered, leaning into him. "Together." And under the endless sky of the desert, in the quiet of the mountains, Clara Whitfield finally knew what it meant to be truly free and truly loved.